As requested by some of my subscribers, today I'm going to make a video about the Necron Reanimation Protocol rule. What is it? How does it work? How to get the most out of it? And what to avoid in this Necron Beginner's Guide video. It's coming right up.
Necrons!
Nick speaking, and welcome to this video. And if you're new to the channel and you want to keep up to date with the Wonders of Warhammer 40k, then please subscribe and hit the bell button to turn on all notifications so you don't miss an upload. Okay, so today's beginner's guide video is all about the Reanimation Protocol rule. Now, if there's anything you would like me to cover in one of these beginner's guides videos for Necrons, then let me know in the comments box below. Also, once you've watched this video, if there's anything you'd like to add to what I've said, then please feel free, comment below. Right, let's go table down and have a look at this rule. Okay, so reanimation protocols, let's have a closer look at them. Now, for this example here, I've got 10 Necron warriors on the table. However, these rules here will apply to any units that have the reanimation protocol rule in their data card profile. Okay, so let's have a look at this rule in full detail. So you roll a d6 for each slain model, that's basically each killed model from this unit, unless the whole unit has been completely destroyed at the beginning of your turn. Do not roll for models that have fled the unit. So first of all, that is very important. There are two things. The first one, if the whole unit is killed, then you can't do reanimation protocols. Once that unit is completely destroyed, that's the end of that unit. Now, most people, even if they know nothing about Necrons, the units, and how they work and what they do on the table, they will know that the way to kill Necrons is to destroy one unit before they move on to the next one, to stop the reanimation protocols. So you could potentially use that to your advantage. So you could actually feed a unit as such to someone. So you could say, well, here's a blob of warriors, push them forward and say, you know, if you want to kill these, you've got to put all your shots into killing these before you move on to the next one. So you could almost sacrifice a unit in that respect. However, that's not necessarily always the best way to play, but it certainly is an option. So we know if the whole unit is destroyed, you can't reanimate. But how do you reanimate? Well, let's have a quick look at the rules again. On a 5+, the model's reanimation protocols activate and it is returned to this unit with its full complement of wounds. Otherwise, it remains inactive. Now, we've previously read that models which have fled can't reanimate. So let's just explain what that means. So let's say we've got our 10 warriors here, and in turn 1 against our opponent, they managed to kill, let's just say, 5 warriors. So what you do is you take 5 warriors away. Now, it's a very good idea to mark your units so you can distinguish which units are which. In my case, for example, on here, I've got a green rod section just at the bottom there, and on this one it's silver. So I know which models go with which unit. This is important if you've got duplicate units to help you work out which models are from which unit. Okay, so we've lost 5 models, and at the end of turn 1 of our enemy, we have to take a morale check, a leadership check. So our leadership is 10, we've lost 5 models. Let's just say we roll a dice and we roll a 6, an 11. That means that one model here is slain from morale checks. In other words, they've fled from the battlefield. Now, regardless whether this rule makes sense or not, that particular model there, he is dead. He cannot reanimate. Now, personally, I think it's a ridiculous rule. It doesn't really work. It doesn't match the fluff, but that is the rule. So this guy here is absolutely dead with absolutely no chance of coming back. However, we do have 5 guys which have just died, and it's now our turn 1. Necron turn 1, and what we can do is we can roll a dice for each one of those models and for every 5 that we roll, they can come back to the unit. Now let's say we get lucky, we roll 5 dice and we get 2 5s. So 2 guys can come back. Now we'll talk about how they come back in more detail in a second. These 3 guys remain off of the board. However, because they weren't killed by losing morale, they are able to come back again in the future. So assuming that these 6 guys here haven't been totally wiped out the next turn, let's say turn 2, then on your turn 2, you're able to re-roll these, and any 5s that you get will again join the unit. Now it could be that in turn 2 of your opponents, they killed another 2 guys from this unit. And let's say you passed your morale checks and no one died from morale. Well, now you can reanimate in your turn 2 the original 3 that were killed and the new 2 that were killed. So again, we'd roll 5 dice. Let's say you rolled 5 dice, you got really lucky, and 3 came back, you got 3 5s. These 2 here again would just stay off the table, and then you could bring them back on turn 3, assuming that this unit isn't totally wiped out. Which is why it's generally very important when you're taking Necron units with Reanimation Protocol that you use the biggest size units that you can, unless you can accept that the units may potentially not get Reanimation Protocols. In other words, you're not relying on the RP rolls to bring them back. RP is obviously just short for Reanimation Protocols, so I'm going to say RP for the rest of the video. Now another thing which we just read, which is very important, is our models will come back with a full complement of wounds. That means that multi-wounded models which have the RP rule are our most powerful RP units. Things like destroyers with 3 wounds or tomb blades with 2 wounds, that model comes back with its full complement of wounds. So you're reanimating a much more expensive unit. Necron warriors coming back 11 points each, a Necron destroyer coming back 50 points each. Far more powerful and far more useful on those multi-wounded units. So reading on. Although you can roll again at the start of each of your subsequent turns. Like I said, each turn, as long as the unit's not totally wiped out, and long as the models haven't been slain via a morale check, then they can keep coming back at the beginning of each of your turns. When a model's reanimation protocols activate, set it up in unit coherency with any model from this unit that is not returned to the unit as a result of reanimation protocols this turn, and more than 1 inch from enemy models. If you cannot do this because there is no room to place the model, do not set it up. You can make reanimation protocol rolls for this model again in subsequent turns. Okay, so this is a fairly important bit. This is about bringing back the models and how to place them. So in our example here, we've got obviously 2 currently dead, and let's say they both reanimate. Now you can only bring back this model into unit coherency with a model that didn't reanimate this turn. Now it doesn't matter if, for example, this one reanimated the turn before, it's part of this unit now. However, if it reanimated this turn, in other words, this guy came back, and let's say we put him at the back, and let's say there's an objective over here and you're thinking, oh, I want to try and stretch out and get that objective. Well, what you're not able to do is put this model at the back here within 2 inches of this guy because he's only just come back this turn. You have to put him in coherency with a model which hasn't reanimated. So, for example, here. And of course, the more models that you're trying to bring back with a unit which is smaller, the more difficult that is. In other words, let's say you got really unlucky and you lost all of these units and you just had 2 guys left. So let's say you got really unlucky and you just got 2 guys left. You managed to somehow pass your morale check, or maybe you use some command points to do that, which we'll talk about more later in the video. You now have to bring back the units, the models, and let's say you got really lucky and you roll a bunch of 5s, and let's say you're actually going to bring back 6 models. What a fantastic RP roll that would have been. But let's just say you're doing that. So what you have to do is make sure that each one of these is within 2 inches of one of these 2 models, like this. So you'd actually have to surround the original 2 models. Not really so much of a problem in this particular scenario. However, there are some scenarios which you really have to watch out for, which make it very difficult to reanimate, and that's particularly when you're in close combat. Okay, so now we're in close combat with Space Wolves, and of course, Necrons being Necrons, they're still going to pose for the camera even though they're in close combat. Now, this is a much more difficult situation to actually get your models back, because not only do you have to be within unit coherency of your Necron warriors which are on the table, so within 2 inches of these, you're not allowed within 1 inch of any of your enemy models. So you've got to be at least 1 inch away from the enemy model and keeping the 2 inch coherency. Now in this particular case it is doable, because you can just about get your models back like so. So let's just say, there you go, quite easily actually, we've got them all in there. However, if you had a savvy player and they did this when they went into close combat and they consolidated into your unit like that, it then becomes a lot more difficult. I'm still able to get 1 in here, for example, probably 2 just in here. We're in coherency, we're 1 inch away from our enemy. We may be able to get a couple over this side. So we are able to squeeze them in, but it is a lot more difficult. We're probably going to have to do this. Now I think actually it's going to be quite difficult to get that 1 inch, 2 inch, so you may find that you may not be able to get all of your models back, in which case, even though you got really lucky and you rolled 6 5s, these 2 here are not able to get back into the unit. Doesn't mean they're dead, it just means that you have to wait another turn to try and get them back. Of course, if these then all die in close combat, they can't come back because the whole unit's gone. Now this becomes even more harder if you're up against a unit which is large in numbers and you only have a few models left. Once you're surrounded like this, it's very, very difficult to get 2 inches of your model and more than 1 inch away from an enemy model. It's very difficult to reanimate. And that's something to bear in mind. Right, I think that's the basic reanimation rule done. So let's have a look at manipulating the rule and how we can use it to our advantage and the things to watch out for. Okay, so let's bring a piece of war gear to the table, the Technomancer, which is typically held by a cryptek. Now, the Technomancer works against any Necron Dynasty unit. In other words, if the cryptek is a Sotek dynasty, then he can use that ability on a Sotek unit of warriors or immortals or any other unit that's got the RP ability that's in the same dynasty. However, if you were taking multiple dynasties, let's say this cryptek was from the Sotek dynasty but these warriors were Nihilic, then his ability won't work on these particular warriors, only on the Sotek units. Now of course in game we wouldn't have the cryptek right up front, we don't want him to be targeted, so you would be burying him in amongst the warriors or whatever RP units you have, or potentially you might be using him to try and buff more than one unit, which he can do. So you might have him, let's say, at the back with another squad of warriors or immortals or whatever, or any RP unit at the back. However, for this video, let's just put him in the middle of those warriors. Okay, so the Technomancer ability from the cryptek now gives us a +1 to our RP rolls. In other words, we're now going to reanimate our warriors on a 4+. So we've gone from a 33% chance of getting a warrior back to a 50% chance of getting a warrior back. That makes a huge difference, and also makes the cryptek a very powerful HQ unit if you're going down the route of having models with reanimation protocols. Now of course he does give other benefits, things like 5+ invulnerable saves, etc. But today we're just talking about RP. Now this rule has a 3-inch bubble. It's not particularly big, but it is big enough to place him in an area where you could buff 1, 2, 3, possibly 4 units if you have a lot of units on foot. So bearing in mind, it's not just for one unit, it's for any unit within 3 inches of this guy. Very, very useful. Now you could replace the Cryptic here with Illuminor. Illuminor is a master Technomancer. So basically he works exactly the same way, except he doesn't have any restrictions on the dynasty that he can buff, which is actually really good if you're taking mixed dynasties. We've also got Orican, who is a Technomancer Cryptic, but for only Sotek dynasty, so he's a little bit more restricted. Orican has some extra abilities like being able to be empowered into a mini Catan, but his Technomancer only works on Sotek units. But of course there's no doubt that having some form of Technomancer around a unit that can reanimate is very powerful indeed. A 4+ compared to a 5+ makes a huge difference. Okay, so next, sticking with characters, we can also take the Resurrection Orb. Here is my Lord. He's got the orb by his feet because he's too busy making a "I'm going to kill you" fist. So, the Resurrection Orb. Let's have a quick look at the rules for that. So if this model has a Resurrection Orb once per battle immediately after you have made your Reanimation Protocol rolls, at the beginning of your turn you can make Reanimation Protocol rolls for models from a friendly Dynasty infantry unit within 3 inches of this model. Now that sounds really good, doesn't it? So basically you can re-roll your RP. Now the thing is with this, it's 35 points, which okay, may not sound hugely expensive, but the issue that we've got with Necrons is we are generally quite an expensive army, and those 35 points are quite valuable. So you have to work out whether it's worth spending 35 points on an orb or just taking more warriors or more immortals. And bearing in mind that more immortals are able to reanimate at the beginning of every turn, as long as the unit's not destroyed totally, whereas the orb, which of course you wouldn't keep at the front because you wouldn't want him to be killed, you would have him buried amongst your units, but the orb of course is just once per game for 35 points, which is quite an expensive piece of war gear. Now I personally don't tend to use it in my lists, however I must admit I think it could actually be a very useful piece of war gear if you're willing to pay the points for it, to be able to re-roll the RP. Of course our Lord has it, but we can take the orb on things like the Catacomb Command Barge, the Destroyer Lord, the Overlord. Basically any of those Lord stroke Overlords can take a Resurrection Orb, and in the right circumstances it could be useful. So you can re-roll all of your failed RPs, but only once per battle. And it has the restriction of just Dynasty infantry units, so you couldn't use this for example on Tomb Blades because they're just bikes rather than infantry. Okay, so before we move on, I just want to have a quick chat about multi-wounded units again and bringing them back. So we've got 3 heavy destroyers here, which of course have 3 wounds each. Now, whilst RP is excellent if you do manage to bring one of these back, because you're bringing back quite an expensive model and he comes back with his full 3 wounds, awesome. The issue that you've got is the maximum amount of models that you can take in this unit is just 3, which makes them very susceptible to being shot out and totally destroyed, which of course means you will lose your RP rolls. Now, coupled with the fact that they only have 1 shot each on their gun, and that's why you don't really see heavy destroyers on the table that much, which is a big shame. I think we should be able to have a bigger unit of these, and I think they should have 2 shots each. However, it is what it is. So bear in mind when you're looking at heavy destroyers, they do have some drawbacks. It's such a shame that we can't do what we used to be able to do in the old days, which is move, shoot, and then move again, because at least then you can get back and hide these guys, but those rules aren't there. So that's why I always say it's best to have maximum unit sizes, but even so with heavy destroyers that is still an issue. However, destroyers is a different story. A big unit of destroyers is presenting quite a lot of issues for your opponent, especially if you've got a 5+ invulnerable save around, or a cover save giving you a 2+ save, and indeed if you've got a cryptic or something around to buff your RP. These guys with 3 wounds each coming back up on a 4+ can be very annoying. Of course they still have the potential of being totally wiped out, but at least with 6 there with 3 wounds each, there's less chance of that happening. Now of course destroyers have the option, which I just want to talk about regarding RP, to take one heavy destroyer in amongst the unit. A lot of people ask me, is it worth having a heavy destroyer? Personally I would say no. The destroyer gun, especially when using some of the stratagems like extermination protocols, will actually do far more damage than a single heavy destroyer gun. However, today we're talking about reanimation protocol. So let's say you have this unit here and this heavy destroyer dies like so. And let's say this guy here dies like so. So you've now lost 2 models with different guns. Now when you're rolling your RP, you have to roll 2 separate dice for the 2 different models. So 1 dice for the heavy and 1 dice for the normal one. If the heavy rolls a 5, he can come back, a 4 of course if you've got a cryptic around, and then this guy, let's say you rolled a 3, he doesn't come back. You don't just roll 2 dice and then choose which one comes back. So that is how RP works when you've got a mixed unit like that. Okay, so before we go on to relics and stratagems, I want to talk about one more unit from the actual codex, and that is the Ghost Ark. Now my Ghost Ark is magnetised, so I can make it into a Doomsday Ark or a Ghost Ark, including rotating the gun so they're the right way round. I've got a tutorial on that and I'll link you up to that in the comment section and the description of this video. Now the Ghost Ark is a transport for Necron warriors, and it has some special RP abilities, but they're only for warriors themselves, not for any other RP units. So it has what's called Repair Barge. It says you can make reanimation protocol rolls for any slain models from units embarked on a Ghost Ark, even though those units are not on the battlefield. Any models returned to the unit this way are added to the number of models embarked on the Ghost Ark. If any models cannot be returned because there is no more room on the Ghost Ark, they are not returned this turn. Of course that means they can return in future turns. So let's just say we've got 10 warriors here on the battlefield and an empty Ghost Ark behind, and these guys here take heavy casualties. Let's just say you lose 6 of them, and then maybe you lose 1 for morale. You've just got 3 left. The 1 for morale of course cannot reanimate. So in your turn, after all of the RP rolls are done, in the movement phase you could move this depleted unit onto the Ghost Ark. So effectively they're going to be inside here, so you would take them off of the table. Now even though they're off the table, you're still able to do your reanimation protocols and actually join more models as they reanimate into the Ghost Ark, effectively to the unit which is no longer on the table. You could do that for maybe 2 or 3 turns, or however long it takes. Your enemy of course now has to destroy the Ghost Ark. They can't wipe out the whole unit of warriors, and then once you've built up the quantity of these warriors, later in the game you could then disembark them if you wanted to, obviously shoot them, etc., whatever you're going to do with them, but you could have a bigger unit back on the table and they've been safely stored inside the Ghost Ark for the game. Of course the Ghost Ark has things like quantum shielding and other things to keep it alive. So that's one use of the Ghost Ark, but probably not the main use. The main use is going to be to help with RP rolls for the unit which is actually on the table. So let's have a look at the rest of the rules. In addition, at the end of your movement phase, you can make reanimation protocol rolls for slain models from Dynasty warrior units within 3 inches of any friendly Dynasty Ghost Ark. You cannot use this ability on a unit that has been the target of a Resurrection Orb or the Orb of Eternity this turn. So basically you get an extra RP roll which is done at the end of the movement phase. So you get to roll at the beginning of the movement phase for your normal RP from the warriors. Then if you have a Ghost Ark within 3 inches, you get to do another RP roll at the end of the movement phase. So 2 RP rolls, assuming you haven't used an orb of some description. Now that works on any units within 3 inches. So the Ghost Ark being quite a nice, big, long model means that I could buff this unit and this unit at the back. Both of these units getting the RP roll twice. Very useful indeed, especially if you have some cryptics buffing the units with a 4+ RP roll. And indeed, very, very useful if you have a large unit of warriors. In actual fact, the best way to use the Ghost Ark is to have large units of warriors. Having a big unit of 20 giving you 2 RP rolls is very useful. It really helps the unit survive. And of course, having that big unit means it's more difficult for your enemy to actually wipe out the whole unit to stop you having RP. Now, not many people use warriors these days in 8th edition, and there's reasons behind that. Of course, Immortals with their Tesla guns can put out a lot more shots, and they have that 3+ save rather than the 4+ save. But that is what the Ghost Ark and the RP rule from the Ghost Ark is all about. And of course, like I said, once you've lost a big chunk of this unit and you're worried the whole unit is going to be wiped out, you could put those models into the Ghost Ark to help them survive. Now of course you do have to be mindful of leadership checks. If you have a big unit, there's more chance you are going to take leadership checks and lose even more models, and of course those models cannot reanimate. So in those circumstances it's worth using the insane bravery stratagem for 2 command points to auto pass morale to stop that from happening. And of course that's another advantage of having units like Immortals on the table. Leadership 10 with just a maximum squad of 10 means it's unlikely you're going to take too many morale checks. And of course, if you've only got 5 in a unit, effectively you're saying, well, I'm ignoring morale, I'm almost ignoring RP because the unit's probably just going to be wiped out anyway. That is another thing to help benefit warriors if you want to pay for Ghost Arks. Of course, it's only really worth having the Ghost Arks if you're having multiple blobs or at least one big squad of warriors. Right, now let's have a look at some of the other RP options. Okay, so first of all, let's have a look at the stratagems. The first one is Enhanced Reanimation Protocols, and this is worth 2 CPs. Use this stratagem before making Reanimation Protocol rolls for a unit from your army. You can re-roll Reanimation Protocol rolls of a 1 for that unit this term. Now, it sort of sounds good. And to be fair, it's probably only good on what we've just looked at, which we have on the table now, and that's the Warrior Ghost Ark scenario, especially if you've got a big squad of warriors here. And also, if you've got a cryptic in amongst this blob, then this stratagem is definitely worth the 2 points. So this is how it works. So at the beginning of the turn you say, I'm going to use this stratagem, it's 2 command points, then you can re-roll the 1s for your reanimation protocols. So if you had a big unit of 20, let's just say you lost over half of them, you've got 8 guys left, so you've lost 12 warriors. That means you've got to roll 12 dice for your RP, and you're getting up on a 4. So out of those 12 dice, you're probably going to roll 2 or 3 1s, which means you can re-roll them. And they've got a 50% chance of getting a 4 for those guys to come back. So let's just say you get a chunk of these guys back up. You roll 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's say you roll 6 4s. So now we've got another 6 which didn't come back up. Let's say you rolled 3 1s and then you re-rolled them and you rolled another couple of 4s. That gives you another 2 models back. And then you get to re-roll RP at the end of the movement phase. Now this rule works until the turn is over. So that means when you re-roll your RP for these 4 guys, you also can re-roll the 1s, which means you've got 50% chance of getting a couple back, and then if you roll another one you can re-roll it and get another one back. So that's probably the most useful scenario for enhanced reanimation protocols, but to be fair, for anything else, honestly I wouldn't spend 2 command points just to re-roll the ones. You may not even roll any ones. Even if you're rolling a big chunk of dice twice like this, you may not roll any ones, or at least you may roll only a couple. So personally I don't think it's worthwhile using unless you're using big warrior blobs and you're rolling 2 RPs from a Ghost Ark. Of course, CPs are very precious for Necrons, so you have to factor in what you want to use your CPs for, and if you're using this particular scenario, then yeah, save a few points back if you want to. Okay, so the next stratagem is Resurrection Protocols. This is a character-based one. It's worth 1 command point. It says, use this stratagem when a Necron character from your army, excluding Trazyn the Infinite and Catan Shards, are slain. At the end of that phase, roll a d6. On a 4+, sets the character up as close as possible to his previous position and more than 1 inch away from an enemy model, with 1 wound remaining. This stratagem cannot be used to resurrect the same model more than once per battle. Now this is very useful, especially if the character that you're trying to reanimate is your warlord, because it takes away you losing Slay the Warlord. So the way this works is it's done at the end of the phase. So that could be at the end of the shooting phase, the end of the psychic phase, into the assault phase. Once he dies, let's say it's the shooting phase, he gets shot off the table, let's say by snipers. He is then killed, and normally you just take him off the board and that's it. But what you can do is at the end of the phase, say I'm going to use this, it's only 1 CP, you roll a dice, and on a 4+, he comes back to where he was, or at least as close as he can get to where he was. And he comes back with 1 wound. Now that is very powerful, especially if he's your warlord. I'd even go to the full length of maybe having a re-roll of that dice if I don't roll a 4+, assuming I haven't used a re-roll in that phase already. So very, very useful. I like that. And of course it works in your turn and your enemy's turn, so it doesn't matter whose turn it is. At the end of the phase, after he's died, you can bring him back. Okay, so the next stratagem is Repair Subroutines, and it's worth 2 CPs. Use this stratagem at the start of your turn before making any reanimation protocol rolls. Select a Canoptek unit from your army that is on the battlefield. That unit gains the reanimation protocol ability until the end of your turn. So 2 CPs, and you can give a unit which has the Canoptek ability reanimation protocol rolls. That is pretty awesome. Now you could use that on units like Scarabs, but the best unit really to use this is the Wraith, because the Wraith is well worth its points with its 3+ save, its good toughness, its good movement, and its ability to kill reasonably well. So the way it works is you take wounds, let's say you lose 3 Wraiths, like so. You've got 2 Wraiths there. At the beginning of your turn you say I'm going to use 2 CPs, going to give this unit RP, and then you do your RP rolls, and you can roll 3 dice, and on a 5+, these guys come back up with their full complement of wounds. Now of course this will work even better if you have something like a Cryptic nearby. That means they come back on a 4+. That gives you a 50% chance. Now the Cryptic with this stratagem really does make it worth those 2 CPs. Without it, just rolling a 5+, especially when it's a small unit, you're not going to be rolling too many dice, is probably not worth 2 CPs unless you just have those CPs spare, or it's your plan from the beginning to use those CPs to reanimate the Wraiths. However, a 4+ is a 50% chance, so you're going to probably get a couple up out of those 3. Very, very useful. And of course the Wraiths coming back with 3 runes really does make that RP roll worthwhile. Okay, so now we're on to the artifacts of the Eons, basically the relics, and the first one is the Orb of Eternity. So models with Resurrection Orb only. The Orb of Eternity replaces the bearer's Resurrection Orb. If a model has the Orb of Eternity once per battle, immediately after you have made your Reanimation Protocol rolls, you can make Reanimation Protocol rolls for models from friendly Dynasty infantry units within 3 inches of the bearer. When making these rolls, add 1 to the result of each roll. Okay, so first of all you need a Resurrection Orb, which we've already discussed is 35 points. Once you have your orb, then it allows you to, once per battle, make a second RP roll, but on that second RP roll you add 1 to the result. So it has a few restrictions. It's 1 unit within 3 inches, which has the Dynasty Infantry special rolls, and effectively you can make your normal RP roll, and then you can make the Orb of Eternity RP roll straight after, and that roll has a +1. So if you had no cryptics about, you'd get a 5+ RP roll, and then you'll get a 4+ RP roll. Pretty useful. Of course, if there was a cryptic about, your first roll would have a 4+ RP, and your second roll, well, this is where I'm not sure because I've looked everywhere and I can't see the answer. Can you stack the Orb of Eternity with Technomancer? I can't see it anywhere. I've looked on forums, there's mixed opinions whether you can. Now, I don't use the Resurrection Orb or the Orb of Eternity, so I don't really know the answer, to be honest with you, but I'm sure that people will let us know in the comments box below. If you know that these two can stack or they can't stack, giving you a 3+ RP with the Orb, then let me know in the comments box below. Okay, so next I want to talk about the Warlord traits. So there's 2 Warlord traits which are very useful for helping RP. The first one is Immortal Pride. Effectively, friendly Dynasty units automatically pass morale checks whilst they're within 6 inches of your Warlord. And of course we've talked about morale checks and getting the most from RP already. So if you had a Warlord standing amongst your warriors and Immortals with Immortal Pride, you can automatically pass morale checks, and that's going to help with your RP. Now the other one is the Thrall of the Silent King, which gives you an extra 3 inches on your ability. So you've had a cryptic there, and he was your Warlord. He can now help boost the Reanimation Protocols within 6 inches rather than 3 inches. That gives him a much bigger bubble to help reanimate, and of course that works for his 5+ invulnerable save as well. Okay, so if you enjoyed that video, you may like this video here. It's a little bit old, but it continues the theme of Necron abilities. You may also like that video there, which is all about Necron play styles. And if you're not subscribed yet, start now and hit the Idic Beer icon. Beam me up!